So let's talk about the book. I emailed you and I read your book, and I was expecting a fun punk rock travel book, which it was that. But then
Hopefully.
it was so much more though. I mean, you talk about like just different cultures. You talk about the history of so many places. You talk about the political turmoil that did and didn't exist in a lot of the places you went to. And you went to the Ukraine, you went to Russia, and please help me out because it's been about 6 weeks. What are some of the other countries that are featured in that book?
Yeah, a lot of the post-communist world. So the Balkans, Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Poland, Hungary, Eastern Europe, Mongolia. I was in China playing some shows, although that chapter didn't make it into the book. Yeah, every time I would go, I had been touring in Europe with bands and by myself for years at that point. But when I was traveling alone, I realized that I had this freedom to go to places that wouldn't make sense to bring a whole group of people, a whole band infrastructure. And so every time I went, I would do my 2 weeks in Germany to make some money and then use that to subsidize going a little farther and farther afield.
So what made you decide that this was the book project? Like, how did this book come to fruition that this is the book and now's the time? I know a lot of the touring took place in 2012, correct?
Yeah, 2012 through 2014. So
Okay.
the last chapter is when I was in Ukraine in 2014 in the wake of the Maidan revolution there. Yeah, I had been writing. So I was a touring musician in more or less full time for years and years, and there's a lot of downtime when you're a touring musician. People fill it up in all kinds of ways, some healthy and some not. Once the novelty as a younger touring musician of getting wasted every night wears off, you need to find other things to keep yourself occupied. And one of the things that I discovered is that the touring lifestyle sort of synchronizes pretty well with good writing practice. So I started doing a lot of writing. You have a lot of downtime to watch the country go by, to meet people, to make notes of the weird vernacular way that people speak, or funny stories that you hear, or interesting characters that you meet. And so I was writing longer and longer pieces, and it seemed like the time was right to do a book-length project. I had this trip planned across Russia, a 1-month tour across Russia on the Trans-Siberian Railroad, and that had sort of started to expand on either side. And I just figured that would be a good jumping-off place to potentially write a book project. So I was just taking notes along the way of that, and once it seemed clear that I did have enough to build a book around, I went back to some of the places, et cetera, et cetera.
So you did a lot of writing on the road, and I actually wanted to ask you that. I mean, your description of the touring lifestyle, I'm totally on board. I'm a touring comedian myself, so it's a very similar thing, except we always travel alone. That's the big difference. But there are so many intense days, especially some of the stuff you described in the book. I mean, you got caught in a snowstorm for over 7 hours. You were in standstill that entire time. You were going via rail at times, via rental car at other times. It looked like some extensive travel. So what was kind of like the real nitty gritty mechanics of like the day-to-day life? When did you finally get that time to kind of just put pen to paper?
Yeah, so a good chunk of that was I was traveling alone. There was about 6 months where I was with my wife, but otherwise, I was a pack mule with a couple instruments and a bag full of merch, which is fine. The overhead is so low that then you can come home with money in your pocket, even if you're only making $100 or $200 a night.
Mm-hmm.
If you only spend $50 a day, then that's a pretty good. The margins are pretty good, but yeah, then you don't have any backup when things are tough, or when you're stranded in a car on a highway in a snowstorm overnight. Yeah, that sort of thing. When did I write? I mean, I would. The logistics of the day tended to be driving during the day. you arrive at the club, you introduce yourself, you meet everyone, you sound check, and then you have a couple hours off. So a lot of it was then. I would, when I was driving, I would have a piece, a spiral notebook in the passenger seat and a pen, so that if I was watching things go by and I had a turn of phrase that I wanted to remember, I could sort of scribble that without taking my eyes off the road. There was some of that I would then transcribe into my phone. I would have conversations with some people sometimes, and if I wanted to remember what they said, I would excuse myself to the bathroom and type it into my phone. Nice. In Ukraine and Russia and in Mongolia, I was traveling by train, so that sort of reverses the day-to-day of it. It's a little bit more like being in a tour bus, actually, because you'd spend the night on the bunk on the train, wake up, get picked up by the promoter in the morning, have all day to sort of bum around the town and see the sights and meet people, play the show, and then get delivered to the train station at 1 or 2 a.m. after the show. And particularly some of the more far-flung, once I got farther east in Siberia, there were situations where it would be, sleep on the train, spend the whole day on the trains, and then sleep again on the train. And those are great times to sort of consolidate notes, because there's no internet access. You're spending all day on the train. You're just watching, mile after mile of forest and little villages go by. So that was good for writing some of the more lyrical passages, describing what that looks like, describing what that feels like, take a nap, drink a beer, type up my notes from the previous days, something like that. Catch as catch can.
So, like, getting into the mechanics of the book, one thing I really appreciated about it was, you did bring, I mean, I learned a lot. Like, I learned a lot about just history from reading your book. And, but you also kind of seamlessly transitioned back into, you would be talking about some type of turmoil that maybe happened a couple decades ago and how it pertains to the experience you were having in that present moment. And then we'd be back to, and I'm really bummed out because the only thing I have to eat in this country is macaroni and sour cream, and the promoter's trying to stiff me. And it was really like just a fun weaving. Did a lot of that happen in the editing process, or did it just kind of flow that way for you naturally when you were writing?
No, that was how my day was. Because I have, I've always been a really intense reader, and particularly in the sort of Slavic world, I've read a lot of history and literature around that over the years. And so I have this even before I started traveling to some of these places, I had this overlay of of what I'd read about it and of the history and of, my expectations. And so, anytime you drive into a place, there's this erasing of the imagined place and replacing it with the actual place, but you end up with these sort of palimpsest layers of what you remember from fiction, what you remember from history, what you read in the newspaper about current events, and all of that is layered on the ways different writers who have been to these places before have described them. So, how does Rebecca West describe this place? How does Eva Hoffman describe this place? How does Chekhov describe this place? These are the kind of people that you want to be in dialogue if you're describing a place, and Paul Thoreau, people. These are places that have been described by very, very great writers, and pretend that hasn't happened is sort of hubristic, I think. And of course, history and description, it doesn't happen in the abstract. It happens, if it happens to the real people in these towns and to the writers who are writing about them, right? Like, you're not getting, Chekhov's description of traveling across Siberia in the abstract. You're getting this actual person, this doctor, traveling across Siberia and having an uncomfortable time and writing about it. Mm-hmm. So there's no disconnect in that sense between their method and mine. I thought, like I was acknowledging the history, acknowledging the writers who had been there before me, while also having my present day experience.
Get your news on with Ron. Don't you want to know what's
what's going on. We're getting our news on today. Get your news on with Ron. Don't you wanna know what's going on? We're getting our news on today. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You can tweet me an article at Ron Placone. We'll go through it together and make it our own. Get your